Things are a little different for us this morning. We said that the last couple of weeks, last week, this week, we're going to take a little different format. Next week we'll resume much more of our norm here at Faith Bible. Through the summer we've been doing the series on the idea of being a citizen of the kingdom. What does it mean to live out as stewards of the kingdom? And so this morning what we'd like to do is pretty much have some illustrations and applications. So all the things we've been working through the summer, now we're going to use some other stories of illustrations and applications. So I'm going to ask those who are participating to come on up and join me, and as we have a conversation about what it means to live out as a citizen of the kingdom. You know, Proverbs 11:10 says that when the righteous thrive, when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. Let me paraphrase it this way. It's when the righteous, those who are the citizens of the kingdom, live out the reality of what it means to be a citizen of the kingdom, to live out what it means to be a redeemed person. What kind of impact does that have in terms of those around them in the city? How does this impact for good the glory of God, and how do the people respond to that? And so we're going to be hearing some stories about how that is playing out in different areas of life, day-to-day life, and how maybe this relates to you in day-to-day life. And so joining me today are Bob and Ruth Seipel. Bob is a teacher at Sycamore High School. Ruth teaches at the University of Cincinnati. Jenny Wright is involved in a teaching, but not the kind of in a school setting. And she'll explain a little bit about that. Nathan Estruth is both from the corporate world's aspect and then also in the public square. How do we engage in the public square? Darren, still haven't figured out why you're here, but just kidding. Okay, Darren is computer programming by day, but it's been exciting to see Darren's passions and interests and the sense of involvement play out in some other realms that he'll share this morning. And then if we talk about the calling of God, the most obvious one, you say, well, that's Craig, right? That's Craig and Heather. They're called. I want you to explore that a little bit more with Craig. And so it's more of a question, and let them share with you and hear this morning from some other stories, applications, and illustrations about what it means to live out the kingdom. So, Bob, you're on deck first. A couple of weeks ago, we had a video that Bob had prepared for us about what it was like as a teacher starting school. And in that video, Bob, you mentioned the idea that you saw yourself in a missional context or in a missional work. And so, can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. Hopefully this is... you can hear me. So I do appreciate the opportunity to share by means of video about what I do and now here today. Perhaps my little backstory. When I was in college, I got a taste of doing youth ministry and loved it and felt like the Lord was calling me to do professional youth ministry. And I remember praying and saying, Lord, you're going to have to change my mind if you want me to do something different. And he did. So through the counsel, wise counsel of people, they probed and they said, all right, if you want to work with kids full time, why give up teaching? That'll give you the greatest opportunity to be with kids all day long. And I thought, that's pretty wise. So I thought I would at least allow my college training to be utilized for maybe a couple of years, and then I would go into youth ministry. And so here I am 33 years later, still in the classroom. And I think that has been my calling. I've simply been obedient to where the Lord would have me, and it has been just the right place. So yeah, the public schools, what an interesting mix and place and such. I said last hour, and we'll say this, that the individuals I work with are broken, and they're insecure, and they're beat up, and they've been lied to, and they're prone to addiction, and they're struggling with their sexual identity, and those are my colleagues. How much more so, the high school folks with whom we work. And there are times it's not pretty. Sometimes I feel like I'm a first responder. I hear people say all the time that, that the culture is going down the tubes. Why doesn't somebody do something about it? And my thought is, I am. I'm getting up every day, and I'm going into that burning building, and I'm trying to bring some order to the chaos that's there. And so that's how I kind of see myself. It's not just about working with kids, it's also working with colleagues. And those colleagues are wonderful, but at the same time, oftentimes beat up and have some twisted thinking, perhaps of their own. And one of the things I tend to do is, rather than have lunch by myself and try to get that out of the way so I can get back to my work and such, I take time out and I have lunch with my colleagues, and we talk and we download and we complain a little bit and we laugh a lot, and I learn about their kids and they learn about my kids and what I'm into and what they're into, and often that spills into, hey, let's go do something after work, and it's natural as breathing. It's just getting to know people, but slowing down enough. In education, you could be growing so fast you just ignore one another. And so one of the things I try to do is slow down and try to get to know people and be known. This poem I came across early in my career, and I like to use it and reflect on it a lot because I feel like this is part of who I am. It's called I Stand at the Door by Sam Schumacher. All right? And I'll read just a portion of it. I stand by the door. I neither go far in nor stay too far out. The door is the most important door in the world. It's the door through which men walk when they find God. There is no use my going way inside and staying there when so many are still outside, and they, as much as I, crave to know where the door is. And all that so many ever find is only the wall where the door ought to be. They creep along the wall like blind men with outstretched, groping hands, feeling for a door, knowing there must be a door, yet they never find it. So I stand at the door. The most tremendous thing in the world is for men to find that door, the door to God. The most important thing that any man can do is to take hold of one of those blind, groping hands and put it on the latch that only clicks and opens to the man's own touch. And it goes from there. In many respects, I see myself in the setting as helping colleagues and kids grope for that door, to find where they're going to be in life, but also to plant those seeds of ideas that maybe there's something more. To be able to put out there some seeds like, people ask me what are you doing this weekend? And I'll say, hey, I'm getting the opportunity to play at church. And maybe that prompts further conversation, or at least plants a seed to say, oh, you're a churchgoer. And I just never know where that's going to go. To strike up conversations with kids, maybe the ones that I'm assigned to, but maybe ones that aren't, and just talk to them about what they're into, and find some common piece that we can talk about further. So oftentimes I just find my role trying to, despite being an introvert, trying to go out there and be extroverted and to win the right to be heard, form some relationships, and you just never know where those relationships are going to go. And of course, I get to teach the best subject in the world, science. And so sometimes I can't help but just be giddy about the way the world is put together and the universe is put together, and to communicate that to them. In essence, like the psalmist, the universe declares the glory of the Lord. And though I would caution to say those very words, hopefully it stirs conversations with students who sometimes come after and say, hey, tell me more about how this all works. And sometimes those conversations spin into something more significant than that. So, thank you.
Ruth, you're down at UC, and that higher education brings some other kinds of challenges. But talk about your role and how that engaging of people, for you, I appreciated the first hour, the emphasis on people's names. Yeah. And share a little bit.
Great. So I'm not trained as a college professor. That's not where I went to school to go and do. I worked in industry for several years. And then came into academia, fully anticipating that at some point in time when my kids were bigger, I'd go back to industry. But fell in love with the opportunity to impact. Bob and I both are high school sweethearts and met each other through the Ministry of Young Life. Always thought that we'd be on staff with Young Life. And then found that we had an opportunity to work with the high school students and the collegiate students in terms of our roles. I often joke with Bob that sometimes the difference between my role and his is I don't have to work with parents. Which is really nice. The collegiate atmosphere does give me quite a bit of an opportunity as well to talk very frankly with students. They're at a moldable age where they're really trying to figure out some things, and there's a little bit more freedoms that they have at the collegiate level where they can try things and see things differently. I teach oftentimes in a large lecture format, and so on any given semester I'm responsible for over 400 students. And then I also run an honors program that's an additional 170 on top of that. And so for me, one of the challenges has always been to make sure that I know who people are. And so Bob and I work really hard at trying to make sure that we know students by name. Many students who've had us in Sunday school, we play the name game because we know that your favorite word is your name and people long to be known. And so again, looking for that right to be heard means I have to know who you are. And so we spend an awful lot of time trying to make sure that we do that. That opens then opportunities for me to have students in my office. And so, I don't want to throw my colleagues under the bus, but most of them are there for their research and for their personal growth. I'm there to be there with students. And so it's pretty easy to be different amongst the people that I work with. And so when people find an opportunity to come in my door and spend time, then they're on my turf. I pray with students in my office. I've led Bible studies at the university. The university doesn't know that. I've had great opportunities to be vocal. Make no mistake, I'm not squelched or squashed by any stretch of the imagination at UC. I just have to be wise as a serpent and gentle as a dove about what I do and where I go and how I do that. One of the opportunities that's been key for us at UC several years ago when our kids were more junior high age, Wayne reached out to us and asked us to go on a missions trip to India. And we said, we've never done anything like that before, let's try that. And so we did as a family, all four of us. And I thought at that point in time, good, I checked that box, I'll never have to do that again. But quickly, I must have blabbed about it down at the university, and somebody heard that and said, great, you can lead study abroad. And I said, well, I don't know if I can do that. But I have found tremendous opportunity through the opportunities of taking students internationally to places that they're uncomfortable and they're outside of what the norm is, and their guards are let down and the persona of who they put off to be at the university campus is dropped. And I can strategically ask key questions about, okay, so how do you feel about being in a Muslim country when the prayer sirens go off? And what do you think about being in a church that's no longer a church and now is a bar and an apartment? And what does that do for you? And how do you think about those things? And those travels are often fairly long, and so you have a great period of time. So oftentimes on Sundays, if I'm not here, it's usually because I'm traveling and working with students, whether it's in Chicago or Montreal or across the globe. Oftentimes Bob's my wingman, and so that's fun to bring him alongside, and we've had several students say, I want a marriage like yours. How does that work? And so we get a chance to model with them and speak about those kinds of things. So again, it's strategically trying to find those opportunities with my colleagues and with students in one-on-one relationships, even though I'm in a large academic environment that is pretty hostile to the gospel. And finding key faculty across the campus, other churches that are on campus. Oftentimes I'll go to a church down in Clifton, so students will see me and go, "You're a churchgoer." Okay, now we can go there. And I also don't do it alone. There are several folks that are in the congregation here as well that I've had an opportunity to bring to campus. Ryan Berg is a regular in the College of Business with Aruna. We have to do some things in the college that speak to service and community involvement, and I said, I know an organization that does that. And so through the honors program that I run, I have 40 students that volunteer with Aruna and get a chance to hear regularly and rub shoulders with people like Tom Rockwood and Ryan Berg. And so that's fun for me to be an open door that allows you all to infiltrate into my world and give me some credibility. And I'll have students say, "How do you know such cool people?" And I'm like, "Because I know cool people." And so that's been fun for me to do as a part of the vocation that I'm involved in.
Jenny? Jenny teaches too, but in a different kind of setting. And so a lot with internationals. And so, Jenny, tell us how you got to that connection and what that looks like.
So when I was a college student at Miami University, I was involved with Campus Crusade for Christ. And between my sophomore and junior year, I got to go to Okinawa, Japan for 7 weeks on a missions trip. And so that was kind of where my love for Japan and Japanese people began. So as I was thinking about graduation, I wanted to find a way to get back there. And so I went over for a year, again to Okinawa, with a Japanese government program called the JET program, Japan Exchange and Teaching, where they brought in native English speakers from the United States, England, Australia, Canada, and a few other countries to work alongside their Japanese English teachers in junior highs and high schools. So I did that for a year and was able to partner with the Campus Crusade staff in Okinawa and host a variety of Christmas parties, Halloween parties, Bible studies in my little Japanese apartment. And so again, my love continued to grow, and I think I want to, go back overseas full time. And after Scott and I were married, we explored that possibility, and those doors just closed. And we ended up here in his hometown of Cincinnati. But I began to teach at a language school in Blue Ash for about 10 years, and about the last 16 years, I've just had my own little business of one. I'm the only teacher, so I'm the manager, president, CEO, and teacher of my school. But anyway, what I've learned is that even though I really wanted to go to Japan, I found a great openness, and I think much more openness on the part of Japanese people living here in Cincinnati. They're usually here for 2 to 5 years. I work mostly with women, so their husbands are here with business or doing research at UC or Children's Hospital. And so they're in a completely different environment, kind of like Ruth was saying, when she takes students out of our country, there's a lot more openness. I've found that that's true here as well. So along with just my weekly classes with my students, I just try to provide as many opportunities for them to be exposed to Christianity and the gospel. So I host a Bible study at my home. I usually have about 8 or 9 women at any given time that are a part of that. And they just bring their kids and run around my house, and it's a little crazy, but we read the scripture, or they read the scripture in Japanese. I never became fluent, unfortunately. And then we discuss it in English. And then if someone doesn't quite get what I'm saying, the person with the highest English ability is dubbed the translator for the day and gets to translate. When I was part of MOPS myself, and even now that I'm beyond that, I encourage students that have preschool-age children to come and be part of the mums group. I host Christmas parties, Easter parties, where we share the gospel each time. And just have seen such a blessing in getting to work with these wonderful Japanese people here. And I'm just thankful that even though I didn't get to go back to Japan full time, that God brought Japan here to me.
Nathan, you were in a corporate context for more than 20 years and have been very active in the public square. And that corporate and public square brings some challenges, and so how do you balance and square that kingdom living in a larger context, like in the public square?
Sure. Well, and Wayne, as I mentioned this morning in the first hour when you talked about the city rejoicing, the verse that came to mind for me is Psalm 11:3, which is, when the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? And I think we see the foundations being eroded and destroyed in our culture, in our nation, in our society. And there's a increasing partnership in the public square and in large corporations that are complicit in that effort. And so they really have merged. I was as a young man, I was a PK. My dad was a pastor. He's retired now, but I always felt called to the public square. And I always felt called, really, first and foremost, because I felt I had a responsibility being placed in this country to be able to engage. We're in a republic, a citizen republic. We can engage and stand up for the unborn. And there's a first 5 verses of Leviticus 20 I commend to you, which is it shows God's heart for not only individuals who give their children to Moloch, but also the responsibility of the community to step in. And I felt from a very young age that one day God was going to look me in the eye and say, "What have you done to defend my little ones?" And but little did I know, like some of the other stories up here, I wouldn't be directly involved in the public square right away. I ended up joining Procter & Gamble, and 27 years later, then stepping in formally to the public square last year when we were asked to do so. But we were involved in the public square all along the way, just kind of on the side and nights and weekends. And so for me, stewardship, as we've talked this summer, really is about where has God placed you and how can you stand. I appreciate the Matthew 10:16 reference, right? Wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. With grace and truth, John 1:14, right? Where can we stand for God's truth in our company, in the public square, wherever we have the opportunity and wherever we've been given a voice. And no matter where you are, if you're in this congregation, you do have a voice in our public square. That's the nature of the system in which we live. And so stewardship looks like, and one of my favorite stewardship passages is Malachi 3. And Malachi 3:8 says, "Will you rob God? Yes, you do." How do you rob God? You rob God with tithes and offerings, all right? And in the New Testament, Jesus kind of raised the bar on that, beyond tithes and the 10%. But I think offerings apply, honestly, to what Buck and Rick and Mark talked about, which is our time, talent, and treasure. And so God's calling us to a place that say, if you work in a company and that company is taking a stand against God's truth in whatever area, what are you called to do about it? And I think that call depends on the individual and what God is asking you to do. But if you're not praying and asking about that, then we're not being wise stewards in it. If you work at a law firm and your law firm is giving donations to Planned Parenthood, have you spoken with someone on your pro bono committee? Have you expressed to them the opportunity to give to your crisis pregnancy center? If you work at a P&G like I did, God gave me the opportunity, never because it was my day job. I certainly could have and should have done much more, but to be pulled into discussions on everything from embryonic stem cell research to HR policies around same-sex partnerships and sex changes to advertising policies. These are all things that really God's Word speaks to directly. And so I just, say I think it's incumbent upon us, and when Donna and I worked through the decision when we were asked to step directly into the public square, it was an opportunity to speak directly on these issues in a way that we hadn't done before. So I think when you come back around, there's a concept around stewardship and obedience that I'll just say, when you look at safety, I think we have come, and I'll speak for myself, it's very easy for me to value the idol of safety in my career. And if you look at a continuum of safety versus recklessness, I think we tend, as a church in America, to tend towards safety more than recklessness. And God doesn't call us to recklessness either. Matthew 10:16, John 1:14. But praying about these issues when we're placed in a company, when we run a company, or when we can step into the public square, not even as candidates, just to surround candidates and support those who are trying to represent God's truth, that's part of stewardship. And I would just say it's incumbent upon each of us to seek God's will and the Spirit's direction for what we individuals are called to do.
Darren, I do know why you're here, Darren. Okay.
You said you got me breakfast.
Yeah, I said. Yeah. We have a group that a small group that invades Chick-fil-A every Tuesday morning, and Darren's been a part of that group for I don't know a number of years, and so it's been fun to see and Darren's his growth and his passions and areas of ministry over the years, and so by day he's involved in computer programming and been so for many years, but to see where you are now, how did you get to those other areas of investment of time and energies and where you are now, Darren? Hold it up close.
Sure. So about 5.5 years ago, our family made a trip to Freedom International in the DR. And when we were leaving, Darby had mentioned to Jason if there was anything that we could ever do to reach out to us, we'd be happy to help. So shortly thereafter, Jason reached out to us, and I assumed it'd be something computer related, and he asked if we'd be interested in helping ship items to the ER. So we have absolutely no experience shipping anything, so I thought that was a bit of an odd request, but we decided to take that on. And what that is really, it's really been a journey for the last 5 years, and I'll explain that a little bit, but we've been able to see firsthand God's faithfulness, to just the ministry faithfulness, furthering his kingdom. And me personally, I think I've learned quite a bit in terms of trusting God. I'm by no means there. I'm still very much a work in progress. But you read these books like by Jerry Bridges, Trusting God, but until the rubber really hits the road, and you're put into a situation where you're bringing nothing to the table, such as shipping. We were bringing nothing to the table other than a warm body. So if you look at the shipping when it first started, I thought a lot of it was me. I was in control. I was doing these things. The very first thing we shipped really wasn't too difficult. And I was like, oh, I got this. I can do this. And then the next thing was this Princeton school auction. And I literally could not do this. I had no idea what I was doing. And it reaffirmed to me who really was in control. God was in control. And I was just really given an opportunity for God to use me, to bring him glory. And it's been an interesting ride the last 5 years to see God's faithfulness through this whole process. I remember, and this is literally the truth, I was at a bagel shop one morning doing Google searches, trying to understand how you do shipping containers. I had no idea. So what do? You go to Google. And a friend of mine came in, and he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm trying to figure out how to ship shipping containers. And he said, well, I have a friend that can probably help you. And to this day, we still use that person to help us ship shipping containers. Another time, a container got kind of sidetracked because we didn't use heat-treated lumber. I had no idea what heat-treated lumber even was. So once again, I went to Google, looked up heat-treated lumber, and found Irvine Wood Recovery over in Lockland. Did a cold call and told them about the situation. They said, we'd be happy to treat your lumber for you for free. I was like, oh, great, that was easy. And then, there's just been so many other things in terms of school auctions, how places just fall into place. In terms of God's furthering his kingdom, you see the opportunities he's brought for us to include co-workers, friends, neighbors. My dad helped. I never would have thought my dad would, sit here side by side disassembling desks at a school a couple months ago. So it's just been a really interesting ride for me personally to watch this all unfold. In terms of the other aspect has been evangelism. So about, I guess it was 2-3 years ago, we did Spread Truth up in New York City. And since that time, our family just kind of has a heart for evangelism. And once again, it's just really being obedient and allowing God to use you. I'm definitely not an expert in terms of biblical scholar and telling somebody things, but I do understand the message of the gospel. And really, all it really takes to do evangelism is the opportunity to really sit down and talk to somebody and listen. I mean, it's really one of the key things is listening and just sharing what you have hope in. What you'll realize, there's a lot of people that are lonely in this world. They really just want somebody to talk to. And they're searching or looking for something. And by sharing the message of Jesus, you give them really what they're really hoping for, whether they realize it or not. It gives you that opportunity. So it's really been a blessing to be a part of evangelism. So Darby's a big part of that, as well as Rick and Karen Setti. I mean, this afternoon we'll be going down to Riverfest. We do that annually. So you're more than welcome to join us. It's a good time. Get out of your comfort zone and really just let God use you. And then we also have other opportunities throughout the year. And we go down to some of the hospitals and hand out Bibles and visit with patients on Easter and Christmas morning. And we have other things throughout the year, such as Trader's World.
A lot of times when you think about calling, we usually say, well, that's like what Craig and Heather, the idea of call to go someplace else. And so, hey, Craig, tell me about that sense of calling for you.
I don't fall into the category of believing that there is a specific call. So if you say to me, are you called to missions? My answer would be, I'm called to make disciples where I am. I don't believe I'm called to overseas missions. I believe that as a family, we are obediently following what God has laid before us. If you talk to us, you probably know this has been a journey for us. It has been a multiple year, where are we going? What are we doing? What does that look like? Are we doing what we should be doing where we are? Should we be somewhere different? And so we really have had to go before God and try to be open and say, what do you want? And where do you want us? And how does that look? Heather told me between hours that maybe I'm talking about a call and not talking about a call, but it's not a thing for our family that God has put something before us that there was never an opportunity for us to push back on. We found plenty of opportunities to push back. The time wasn't right. We didn't have the family completed. You know, we had 100 excuses to not take that first step of action, to say, what do we think God may have for us? Should we talk to somebody? Should we apply with an agency? Should we call and give the recruiter our cell phone number? Do we call up and say, hey, Wayne, we need you to fill out a reference that says we're moderately good, upstanding members of a congregation? Wayne threatened to make me buy him breakfast for that one. But we have made those choices. We've taken that step forward. We have looked and said, okay, where is that path straight? You know, I mentioned our children. We do have a few children. We do have concerns about what it looks like for them abroad. And there were things with that where it was, how is this going to work out? And when we couldn't see the details playing out before us, when we looked the right direction, the path was straight. When we went other directions, God closed the doors. And sometimes our fingers were still in them, and that's okay. But when we walk the path towards where we're going now, looking in North Africa, we see that, you know what, it is. The details fall into place. God provides in ways that we don't dream of. His goodness is so deep. And, you know, every time we think we understand it, we better see the depth of it. And I think that is part of what is reassuring, that we're walking that correct path.
Well, one of the things that I think, if you listen to some of the words and some of the story, involves this idea of trusting God, that ultimately being faithful involves exercising faith. It really is trusting God, that God has you where you are, And now, Lord, I'm going to trust you to be obedient with regards to how I live and how I speak and those opportunities that come. And so really that stewardship, faithful stewardship, it also involves that element of trust. And how then will I really trust the King work through me in proclaiming the truths of the kingdom? Nathan, you shared in the first hour just one other thing, just as an application, just the idea of praying for representatives. You just want to elaborate on that for a minute, and then we'll come back and talk about encouragement. So,
Sure. There's many ways that you can engage, but one of the ways is find Christian men and women who have actually been elected to public office, whether it's in Ohio or local community or at the federal level. Especially as you get to places like Columbus and D.C. For Christians that are standing true to God's word, it's a very lonely place. They're pressure cooker places. And we often, when we do tend to engage in the public square, it's about, getting someone elected. And we kind of assume that they'll just do what they need to do. And actually, that's when they need the support the most. So just adopting a believer, choose one in the House, in the Senate, in the State House, in the state, in the State Senate. And there are programs called the Daniel Initiative that Citizens for Community Values does, where you just show up in their office and pray with them. There's not an elected representative in Ohio, no matter what party, that will turn you down if you just want to set up an appointment in their local office and say, I just want to come in, and you just ask them, how may I pray for you? Don't talk to them about issues, just develop a relationship, okay? I've done that at the federal level, where I make a point of at least twice a year going in, having coffee, having dessert with a senator or a House member that I know are believers. And sometimes over tears, they talk about the pressures that they're under. They need accountability, they need encouragement, they need fellowship. And don't assume that they have it. You can do that. These are ways that we as citizens can easily step in. And you do it with wisdom and with tact, Daniel 2:14, right? It really is about how do you show up in a way extending grace to someone and being God's hands and feet to encourage them to stand for truth.
Lastly, one of the things I asked is what would you share with the congregation as a whole? Just maybe some encouragement, some things to challenge, maybe a little bit about how they might engage in terms of the role and of living out in the kingdom. One of the other things I've learned from you is, you know what? It's personal. It's personal. Names, getting to know people, going in and sitting down with a person. Okay, it's a person. It's personal. Engage with people. Okay, that's how it begins. So, yeah, Bob.
I said between services, this panel shouldn't be 6 big, it should be 260 big, because there's many of you that are doing fantastic things also in your little neck of the woods. But I think a lot about the story of the woman at the well, and I just think that is a beautiful model that for me, the high school is the well. And I go there and I strike up conversations in the hopes that maybe they will go deeper. And likewise, or it's around the water cooler or whatever it may be. But the first step is really being real with folks and getting to know them. That's the first step in order to hopefully share with them the gospel. So it's just a thought I have.
Anybody else? Ruth?
I think a lot of it is being uncomfortable. I know I rely more on the Lord when I'm uncomfortable, when I'm doing it under my own will, as Darren was saying. It's too easy to think, well, okay, I've got this down. But being willing to say yes to things. I listen oftentimes to the small voice in my head that says that person needs to be talked to, or, I'm looking for the student who's busy on their phone because they're not really engaged with somebody else. And so looking for those opportunities to be present in the moment and to say yes. I guess if you're comfortable in your job, maybe you need to think about not being comfortable. And then you really begin to see where the Lord is working, and you see where your abilities are just a part of his toolbox to do with what he needs to do.
Along with that, I would just really encourage you to look out for international people that might be in your neighborhood or at your workplace. A lot of times they want American friends, but they tend to stay in groups of Japanese people or Chinese people or Indian people. And I know there's a lot of different ways to do that. I know Shauna's involved with a group and others here at church. But yeah, just step out of your comfort zone and reach out to someone who's living here, for a short amount of time, but a time that God can really use in their lives to make a difference for eternity while they're living here in the United States.
If you work in a larger company, look up and look around. So find someone in more senior management above you that you think may know the Lord, where you might be able to establish a relationship and just pray for them, encourage them, and ask for their help back. How can you help? And then for those around you or maybe underneath you, folks that are struggling to live out their faith in the marketplace, if you will, of a company, it's increasingly hard, right? You look and try to become a friend or a mentor to them. If you are a business owner, a Christian business owner, the Ohio Christian Employers Alliance, Ohio CEA, we formed in the last year. The Chamber of Commerce of Ohio, backed by the big companies, is now driving through legislation and public policy in our own state that will soon, if passed, prevent you as a business owner from living out your faith in the marketplace. Whether it's on abortion, whether it's on employee benefits, whether it's literally sharing the gospel at times, especially as you look at some of the transgender and gender dysphoria issues. These are very real public policy issues. You see it happening in other states. It is happening here. Band together as Christian employers. If you know someone who owns a business that's a Christian employer, ask them if they know about Ohio CEA. It's a network of statewide Christian businesses that are trying to actually understand these issues and live out their faith with their employees and stand up with the elected officials in Ohio at the same time for God's truth in a winsome way. These are all things that each one of us can do.
I would say don't underestimate or constrain how God can use you. I mean, it would have been very easy, and I'm surprised I didn't say no when Jason first asked me, but I'm so glad I didn't because I've been blessed in so many ways.
I would say do what you do in maybe a larger sense of community. If you feel like there is a path you maybe need to walk, pray about it. Do it with other people. Don't feel like the expression that this may be what's next for me is a commitment to it for a lifetime. We kind of walked some of our path alone, and the process of it pushed it into a wider circle for us. And as we get to where we are now, the more people, the bigger the group, the firmer the community, the better it is. And, God is faithful in his body.
James, why don't you come and lead us in a song as we prepare for the Lord's table. And out of this, the elders have been looking at how do we encourage Faith Bible Church as individuals and certainly as corporately. How do we look to a vision, to a path to encourage all of us to be living out the reality of our faith as kingdom citizens, engaging people, engaging communities, engaging wherever God has placed us, so that we can share the good news of the King, Jesus Christ.